The gravel shoulder of Route 66 felt like a bed of hot coals under my feet, burning through the thin soles of my sneakers with every agonizing step. But the physical pain was just a dull hum compared to the roaring white-hot fire of the trail in my chest. My 2-year-old son Noah was clinging to me in his carrier, his small forehead damp with sweat, pressing against my collarbone. I could feel his rhythmic, trusting heartbeat against mine. He was completely oblivious to the fact that his mother was currently a fugitive from her own life, running away from a house that had become a prison. Huge semi-trucks thundered past us at 80 miles per hour, their massive frames shaking the very ground I stood on. The violent slipstream of wind they left behind threatened to knock me into the dusty ditch with every pass, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Behind me lay a house of beige stucco and hollow promises. Ahead was only the shimmering heat haze of the highway, and a desperate flickering hope for safety. My throat was parched, the bitter dust of the road coating my tongue, making it hard to breathe. But the fear of being caught by Anthony kept my legs moving. Then, the sudden sharp scream of tires cut through the mechanical roar of the highway. A familiar black heavy-duty truck swerved onto the shoulder 100 yards ahead, its brake lights glowing like angry eyes in the settling dust. My father, Harold, didn't even wait for the truck to come to a full stop before he threw the door open. He looked like a storm cloud in human form, his face pale with a rage I hadn't seen in the 30 years he'd spent as a police officer. "Emma," he bellowed, his voice booming over the relentless sound of the rushing traffic. He ran toward me, his heavy boots crunching the gravel with every stride. He reached out, his hands trembling as he grabbed my shoulders. "Where's your vehicle? Why in God's name are you walking on the side of a dangerous highway with a toddler in this heat?" I finally stopped, and the sudden lack of motion made my legs shake so violently I thought I would collapse. I looked him dead in the eye, the wind whipping my hair across my face, and the secret I'd been suffocating under for months finally broke free. "Anthony took my keys, Dad. He disabled the SUV and told me I'm medically unfit to drive. He said I was having a breakdown. He said he was protecting me from myself." Before I tell you what happened when we went back to that house, I want to take a second to connect with all of you. Stories like mine happen in every corner of the world, and knowing you're out there makes me feel less alone. Please drop a comment and let me know which city you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who is part of our community today. The silence inside my father's truck was heavy and suffocating, a stark, clinical contrast to the chaotic roar of the highway we had just left behind. The air conditioning blasted against my face, drying the salt of my tears, but it did nothing to thaw the cold heart knot of shame in my stomach. Noah had fallen asleep the moment his head hit the car seat, lulled by the familiar vibration of the powerful engine. My father's hands were clamped onto the steering wheel at 10 and 2, his knuckles so white they looked like polished bone. He wasn't looking at me as a father right then. He was looking at the road with the cheap stare, the one he used when he was analyzing a high-stakes crime scene. "How long, Emma?" he asked, his voice low and vibrating with a suppressed fury that made the air in the cabin feel thin. 6 months, I whispered, barely able to hear my own voice. Since Noah's 18-month checkup. My father slammed his hand against the dashboard. 6 months of this? 6 months of being a prisoner and you didn't call? I'm your father. I'm the man who taught you how to read a contract, how to stand your ground, and how to never let anyone dim your light. Because it didn't look like a crime, Dad. That's how they do it. It's subtle. It didn't start with a lock on the door or a raised fist. It started with a casserole. It started with Susan showing up every night with dinner, saying, "Emma, honey, you look exhausted. Let me take the night shift so you can get some beauty sleep." And I was exhausted, so I let her. Then it was Anthony, the brilliant accountant, saying, "Babe, why stress about the bills? Let me handle the finances and the password so you can focus entirely on being a mom." And I was stressed, so I thanked him. I gave them the keys to my life because they made me feel like I was too broken to carry them anymore. It's the boiling frog, Dad. If you drop a frog in boiling water, it jumps out. But if you put it in cool water and turn the heat up 1 degree at a time, it cooks to death before it even realizes it's dying. Susan moved into the guest house. Then she was in my kitchen every morning criticizing the nutritional value of my oatmeal. Then she was checking my grocery receipts, circling items she thought were wasteful. When I complained, Anthony told me I was being ungrateful. He told me I had postpartum anxiety. He convinced me that my own brain was failing me. We pulled into the pristine, manicured gravel driveway of the estate. It was a fortress of beige stucco and wrought iron, surrounded by hedges so perfectly trimmed they looked like they were made of plastic. Anthony and Susan were sitting on the patio, the very picture of upper-class tranquility. Susan was swirling a glass of expensive Chardonnay, laughing at something on her phone, while Anthony leaned back in his chair like a king in his castle. They looked like people who hadn't just forced a mother and child into a death-defying walk on a highway shoulder. Stay in the truck, my father commanded, his voice like iron. No, I said, unbuckling my seatbelt with a snap. My fear had been replaced by a cold, hard clarity I hadn't felt in years. This is my life. I'm the one who lived through it, and I'm the one who's finishing this. I pulled Noah into my arms and followed my father up the stone steps. Susan spotted us first. Her plastic practice smile didn't drop. It just froze, becoming a brittle mask of false concern. "Oh, look who's back," she called out, her voice bright and sharp. And she brought reinforcements. "Harold, you're just in time for a drink. We were just discussing Emma's recent emotional episodes. She really needs professional help, Harold." My father didn't look at the wine. He didn't look at the beautiful patio. He stepped directly into Anthony's personal space, looming over him with the psychological weight of 30 years in law enforcement. "Where are her keys, Anthony?" Anthony stood up, smoothing his designer polo shirt, trying to maintain his mask of the concerned husband. "Harold, let's not be dramatic. We were worried. Emma's been scattered, unstable. She almost hit a curb last week. We took the keys for her own safety and the baby's. You know how new moms get the hormones, the baby brain. We are just doing what's best for her." I stepped out from behind my father, my voice echoing off the stucco walls. "I hit a curb because you were screaming at me from the passenger seat about a $5 coffee receipt, Anthony. I am not unstable. I am not unstable. I am not having a breakdown. I am leaving you." The air in the yard turned to ice. Anthony crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing into slits of pure malice. "Leaving? To where, Emma? You don't have a job anymore. You don't have a car. You don't even have a bank account that isn't under my primary control. We are keeping this family together because you are clearly incapable of doing it yourself. You have nothing." My father took a half step closer, his voice dropping into that terrifyingly steady rumble he used on suspects in the interrogation room. "You aren't protecting her, Anthony. This isn't a family, it's a siege. You isolated her, you disarmed her, and then you took her hostage. Now, you're going to give me those keys and her passport, or we're going to have a very different kind of conversation, one that involves handcuffs and a precinct." "Or what, Harold?" Anthony sneered, his arrogance finally breaking through the mask. "You going to arrest me? In my own house? I make the rules here. She wants to leave? Fine. She can walk back to the highway. But she's not taking my son." "Actually," my father said, his voice dropping an octave, "let's talk about the law. You are withholding her personal property. You are restricting her movement, and if you try to stop her from leaving with her child, that is unlawful imprisonment. Susan, if you touch that phone to call your friends in the homeowners association, I'd love to explain the situation to my former colleagues. I'm sure they'd love to hear about the police chief's daughter being held against her will by an accountant and his mother." Susan's hand, hovering over her phone, began to tremble. My father turned to me. "Go upstairs, Emma. Get your documents, get the baby's things. I'll stand guard right here." I raced up the stairs, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The house felt different now, cold, alien, like a crime scene waiting to be processed. I tore open the closet and shoved clothes into a duffel bag with clumsy, frantic speed. My father stood in the doorway, his back to me, watching the hallway like a stone statue. 6 months ago," he said, his voice cracking with a pain I hadn't expected. "This Sunday dinner, when you didn't laugh once. The way you looked at him before you answered a simple question about the weather. I saw the light going out in your eyes, Emma. I thought I was respecting your boundaries. I didn't realize I was leaving you behind enemy lines without a weapon. I am so sorry, honey." I stopped for a second, clutching Noah's favorite blanket. "You're here now, Dad. But you need to know. I didn't stay because I was weak. I stayed because I was waiting for the right moment." I reached under the corner of the mattress, the one place Susan never checked because she was too busy inspecting the dust on the baseboards. I pulled out a thick hidden folder. Inside were photos of bank statements I had snapped when Anthony left his laptop open, screenshots of texts between Anthony and Susan discussing how to medicate me into submission, and logs of every time they'd locked me out of our shared accounts. "I wasn't just surviving, Dad," I said, my voice finally steadying. "I was gathering ammunition. It's the invisible chain of the survivor. You don't yank against it while they're watching. You wait. You pick the lock while they're sleeping." Today was the day the lock finally clicked. We drove back to my father's house in a blur of relief and exhaustion. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a brutal, nauseating crash. As soon as we sat at his kitchen table, I dumped the folder out. "We need to check the finances, Dad. All of it." My father was already on the phone with his lawyer, but he watched me as I spread the papers out. It took 20 minutes to realize the true, sickening extent of the betrayal. My SUV, the one my father had bought me as a graduation gift when Noah was born. Anthony had sold it a month ago to a dealership 3 towns over. The bill of sale was right there, signed with a shaky forged version of my signature. $12,000, gone. He sold your car? My father whispered, his face turning a dark, dangerous shade of red. He used the money to pay off a secret credit card in Susan's name, Dad. Look at the transfer logs. They hadn't just taken my keys, they had liquidated my independence to fund Susan's gambling debts and lifestyle. But then I found the real bomb. A private lender agreement for $40,000. The borrower listed was Emma Miller. I never signed this, I gasped, the room feeling like it was spinning. He forged your name for a high-interest loan, my father said, examining the paper with a professional eye. And the trust fund? Your grandmother's inheritance for Noah? I logged into the banking app, my fingers slipping on the screen. Incorrect password. I tried again. Locked out. I called the automated line and punched in my social security number. The balance of your account ending in 44922 is $0. I dropped the phone on the table. $56,000. Every cent my grandmother had left for my son's future was stolen. They hadn't just tried to control me, they had tried to bankrupt me so that even if I did leave, I would have no choice but to crawl back to them for food and shelter. The next morning, Anthony and Susan actually had the nerve to pull into my father's driveway, screaming about illegal withholding of a minor and threatening to call their lawyers. I walked out the front door alone. I didn't have a weapon, and I didn't need one. I simply handed Anthony a heavy manila envelope. Inside were copies of the forged loan documents, the car sale receipt, and the time-stamped logs of the trust fund drainage. You stole $56,000 from your own son's future, I said, my voice echoing in the quiet morning air. That isn't a marriage dispute, Anthony. That is felony fraud and identity theft. You have exactly 24 hours to move every single cent back into that account, or this file goes directly to the district attorney. My father's former partner is already waiting for my call. Anthony's arrogance vanished instantly. He looked at the documents, then at the house where a retired police chief was watching him with a lethal focus. He was an accountant. He knew exactly how many years in a federal prison he was looking at. Susan's mouth opened to shriek, but Anthony grabbed her arm so hard she winced and pulled her back to the car. 3 months later, I turned the key in the lock of a small sun-drenched apartment on the other side of the city. It was a mansion. It didn't have a guest house or a pristine gravel driveway, but the air inside tasted like oxygen. Anthony was facing a series of criminal charges, and Susan had been forced to sell her property to cover the debts they had accrued in my name. I was rebuilding my credit, one day at a time, working a job I had found on my own merit. I looked at Noah, who was happily stacking blocks on the rug, finally free from the silent tension of that beige fortress. I realized then that I wasn't a boiling frog anymore. I was a survivor who had finally found the strength to jump out of the fire and into a life that was finally, truly mine.